I double-checked to make sure it was real. I sort of grabbed the old Newmont report out of the cupboard and went, what the? And I flipped through the pages and had a look at it, and there was the mag anomaly, and we were right on the very southern tip of it, and the thing was like 20 kilometres long, and I went, holy smoke.
That's fantastic.
We'd better go and have a look at that.
What better way to start the year than by talking with an internet celebrity in the industry, Nick Tate. Nick is a geologist and he's worked all over the world, and of late he is YouTube famous because he puts fantastic videos together helping us all how to do our work in the field. If you haven't seen his videos, he runs through a whole bunch of instructional things, whether it's RC drilling, diamond drilling, mapping, outcrops, mineralization, and even stuff about spiders in the field. He's got amazing material. So I've been wanting to talk to Nick for some time, quite jealous of the life that he lives. And I finally had a chance to sit down with him and ask him some questions, and didn't really intend to go into why he got into the video stuff, but you'll see that that's where the conversation went, and it was really quite entertaining. We also cover a bit of his career in Asia and how he went through training as a geologist and then setting up companies, working with tenements and trying to find deposits, and now doing what he does best, which is making content and mapping for clients that he can pick and choose. So without further ado, let's get into it. How's it going, Nick?
Good.
Welcome to the show, man. It's been you've been a guest I've been looking forward to talk for some time, internet celebrities and all. You're doing so many cool things. I'm quite jealous, actually, geologists having fun in the field and documenting it for us all to sort of gape at, and wishing we'd be out there doing the things that you're doing. So yeah, thanks for making the time.
Well, it's time becomes more important the older you get.
Yeah, well, yeah. I had just turned 45, and I was just trying to decide last week, and I was just trying to decide whether now I'm in the old part or in the young part, because one of our viewers suggested a topic on talking with young entrepreneurs in junior mining companies, and I was like, great topic, but do I still qualify in that space, or should I start? I don't know. I probably don't answer that question. But look, there's nothing more than experience, and it sounds like you've had this quite rich career. And I always like to have a bit of a background about people's careers. So what? And then obviously for me, how you decided to get into the work that you're doing now, because you're obviously still doing some, plenty of consulting on the side as well with the skills that you have. But what's your trajectory as a geologist coming into the industry a few years ago and doing what you do now? I'm interested.
Well, I studied undergraduate geology at Flinders University in South Australia, and I think I seemed to be the only student there who knew on day one that he wanted to be a geologist.
Wow.
The rest of the class was filled with students who were either just sort of trying geology to see how it went, if they liked it, or in my case, at that university at that time, art students had to do one science subject, and geology seemed like the easiest one. So it was chock-a-block with 200 art students who all, of course, disappeared in second year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to be a geologist since I was 5, and at least that's what my parents reported. And when I got to university, I already knew that I wanted to be a geo, and I just loved rocks, and I loved being outdoors, and I loved discovering things. Yeah. So it was an easy choice for me, but it seemed that wasn't the case, and I was actually quite surprised when I got to university and found all these other people who were still trying to figure out what they wanted to be. And I thought, well, how do you not know at this stage? But apparently people don't, but I did. So it was, perhaps I was the right sort of mold for that anyway. I was never great at maths or things requiring large amounts of memory. Yeah. My father was a chemist, an organic chemist, an academic, and his memory was unbelievable. He could recall extraordinary detail on chemicals and what they did and their formulae, etc. And I think he was sort of quite disappointed that I didn't follow that. In fact, I did very poorly at chemistry. I passed, which was just kind of, adequate. And look, chemistry does help you in geology. There's no question about it. You understand more about what's going on in the background of the rocks and how they form if you know a bit of chemistry. But I was certainly never going to be a chemist. But I just had this love for discovery, and which I probably inherited from him. He was a pure academic. He was in it entirely for the discovery. He didn't care about the money. He didn't care about the recognition or the medals or the papers or anything. He published stuff, but he was just in it because he loved finding stuff out, and he went to the lab every day until he was 82. Wow. Because he just loved doing it, and I must have absorbed some of that, except that it was on rocks instead of chemical.
Well, geez, and I kind of share that, how can you not see that this is the best thing, the most fun thing to do? And I had the same thing. I mean, in my class, a lot of people were there for the rocks, a pretty devoted crowd. We didn't have that. I mean, I studied in Amsterdam, but where we had this influx of people didn't really know what they wanted. People mostly knew what they wanted, but still, you would even question your friends who didn't study each other. Well, why wouldn't you study this? I mean, we get to go do all this field work, and be outside and basically get paid to what's our hobby, which is a bit of hiking and tramping and looking at stuff and discovering stuff. And as a kid, I'm much the same. My parents tell me I was 8 and not 5, but it was a pretty similar trajectory. I always wanted to become a geologist, and you can kind of tell that probably from the stuff that I write about and publish about, or blog or vlog or whatever it is, and the stuff that you put out now. I mean, that passion is sort of shining through the screen, and that's, I mean, not necessarily to get into the subject of that geology isn't sexy anymore and all those things, but that obviously is the way to connect with people and to show that what we do is pretty good fun, I guess, and we get paid to do the fun stuff.
and on getting paid, my first jobs were holiday jobs on the university vacation, trying to get some experience, and it just happened that first jobs I got were mapping jobs, and I didn't realise at the time, but those first few jobs you get mould the rest of your career, because the people the people you meet, the connections you make in those few jobs trigger almost every other job that comes along later. And when I graduated, people would ring me up and say, "Oh, look, I've been told by," in this case, John Main. He was running CRAE in Broken Hill, where I did one of my mapping jobs.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, yeah, you did some mapping for him, and he said you did a reasonable job, and we're looking for a guy to do mapping. Do you want to come and map this thing?" And I was like, "Okay." And that just kept happening. And I never actually had a real job. I just kept on accepting these mapping contracts. And it was just the best job ever. I just got to go to all these different projects, and I got to really understand the geology, because I went out in the field and mapped every one of them. And every one of those, it doesn't matter what you're mapping, you always find something new that someone has not seen before or whatever. And
well, that's it. Every day is different, right? And it's a new challenge every day, whatever the rocks are. And that's stupid. I don't know if you I talked to Brett Davis, who's obviously doing a similar kind of job, doing lots of mapping, getting paid for, and again, was quite jealous of listening to that. But the point, besides that, what I did find interesting is how indeed you roll into that job, because finding good mappers who do it for a living, and who are obviously also happy to be out there for fairly prolonged stints of time in faraway places. I mean, there is also a dedication and an implication on your life and work-life balance, obviously. I mean, it's fun, but you do have to be aware in the last couple of decades, almost every CV on your desk is, I'm a geologist, I love geology, but what I really want to do is build three-dimensional models of stuff, because that allows me to be home, in the future a bit more often. So I find it really interesting that people clearly choose, and not many, but very specific people are obviously very good at it, and never lose the love, and still like to be out there in 45-degree heat with a fly on every square centimeter of your body, probably in Australia and in the Flinders Ranges, for instance. But is that still, so tell me about so career, obviously, so you got into that, and then people started offering mapping jobs, but has it always just been, is that sort of the red line through it, or is that mapping, has that always been your game, and is that still the game, or do you do other kind of stuff as well?
Well, it certainly was until about 2003, when I accepted a job by a curious and very circuitous route in Laos to go and do some mapping for Pan-Australian Resources, who were just getting started up there.
Yeah.
And I did, and it was right out there on the end of that bell curve of remote and long stints and everything else. Yeah. But it was just super exciting, because it was all of those things, and secondly, it was turned out to be a really interesting deposit to work on, and ultimately turned into a mine. So we discovered something. In fact, two things. So that sort of kicked off another phase where I saw that what you could do in a place like that. I'd worked in developing countries all over the place prior to that. But it was always just contract jobs. But there I could see that there was a great opportunity to do that again, because there was similar geology over half the country, and there was a really apparently favourable investment law and a mining law that was very simple but workable, and all this open ground. There were only half a dozen exploration licenses in the whole country. So I thought, I'll just give that a go and try and do it myself again. So I set up my own company there, and employed a couple of local kids out of the technical college, and just started trying to sweep together data and identify projects and things that I could then take to joint venture partners in Australia to fund it. And all of that came under the heading of, seemed like a good idea at the time. And I learned an awful lot over the ensuing 15 years about doing business in a third world developing communist country, which and I ran my own show. I employed my own people. I did all the, I was chief cook and bottle washer for the whole thing.
Yeah.
But in 15 years, basically, I got one project off the ground. We found lots of really interesting things, but I got one off the ground.
Yeah.
And then I learned a lot of hard lessons about how to actually make money or not out of that. I was funding it all by doing basically consulting jobs elsewhere in the world and my usual mapping work.
Yeah.
But I was spending all the money I earned playing exploration company in Laos.
Yeah.
And it was great fun, absolutely great fun. And like I said, extremely educational, and now shapes what the kind of advice that I give to other people working in third world countries. So I learned everything from the ground up about running a business and dealing with people and dealing with law and even the development of law, because they were busy trying to redevelop their law and their tenure system there, and why those things work and don't. So it was just the most amazing educational experience, not particularly profitable.
Yeah. Well, It sounds like, I mean, I can sort of imagine how hard it. I mean, I've been up there for a few weeks and experienced Laos from probably some of those angles, and mixed that with the usual challenges of setting up exploration programs and hiring people and the business side of things, and then the fact that exploration isn't like your normal business where you've got some revenue and and then you sell stuff and the bottom line is positive, and then you buy more stuff and you grow more stuff. It's you either find something or you don't, and people either take an interest in it or because even if you find something, it can be pretty hard with that jurisdictional risk to get it. To give it some traction. So, and I was wondering about that background because you recently said something about the 20 rules of exploration or something, and I've read through those with interest, and I'm sure many other people did, because you go from the top and you go yep, and obviously all of that makes sense, but there are a few candidates sitting on that list that you would only know once you've gone through those pains, right? I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, one of them said something like, mineralization is not ore, I mean, you wouldn't be chasing academic, information because you like rocks. You're looking for something that can turn into a project, and you can only learn that the hard way, I guess. So that sounds like, what did you say, 15 years of pretty good experience?
Yeah, well, it was that, of course, and working for juniors and other people in every facet of the exploration industry, except perhaps, corporate side in the majors. I've never delved into that, but it's of course that list, as I said, is based on the 10 canons of Sigmoiseg, and they're as good today as they were the day he wrote them, and then the others are a bit more ground up. I'm a very much ground up type of explorer, whereas a lot of other people now, particularly nowadays, are top down. So they top down being, you look at the entire globe and you say, okay, we're after orogenic gold. Where are the orogenic gold belts in the world? And you look at those, and then you say, okay, so which ones of these have the runs on the board, which ones have some elephants, which ones have all the right stuff, and which ones have the right isotopes, and you work slowly downwards and get more and more close to the ground until you decide, okay, this is the area we want to look. Whereas I go completely the other way around. I'll go in and say, okay, there's clearly some, gold in this area. It's got the right kind of rocks for what I'm looking for. Show me the old workings. That's really the thing. And I'll go and look at the biggest clusters of old workings, the alluvials, things that were done in the past, things that lead you from the ground up towards a deposit rather than the other way around. Both approaches have proven successful in the past and will in the future, I'm sure.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're looking for a little bit, because I talked to John Ronsky about this as well. He's got this whole system approach to prospectivity analysis, and I'll put a link for people if they want to listen to that. But it's, if you're looking for those big monsters, I mean, Olympic Dam probably wasn't found by looking for old workings. I'm guessing. So there's probably depends a little bit, but I agree. I mean, if where there's smoke, there's fire, and the best way to see smoke is a bunch of artisanal workings, because those people are very clever in finding stuff, and especially if they've lived on the land for a long time. It's classic exploration in places like Asia and Africa, and probably before that, before every stone was turned over in Australia, New Zealand, here as well. If there's some old adit somewhere, you probably somebody invested time in this area. So makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's certainly my approach. I actually watched that interview with John Ronsky, and he is definitely a top-down guy. And as I said, that approach can be very successful, and will no doubt become more successful as we get better and better tools for looking undercover. But as per Rule 20, which we were originally going to discuss here, that does not mean that there are not good, high-quality Tier 1 deposits sticking out of the ground now, because one of the other many lessons that I learned in Laos and elsewhere is that there are a whole host of reasons why the things that are sticking out of the ground don't turn into mines. First of all, they can be sticking out of the ground but not recognised for what they are. Secondly, they can be recognised but stalled somewhere on the exploration or development ladder for one of a million reasons, something I learned several times the hard way. And thirdly, they can be actually sticking out of the ground and simply not seen because people are not looking anymore for things sticking out of the ground. And that, again, I've experienced. Both the thing we discovered in Laos, that was originally the Pukam gold deposit. That had been found. The actual prospect had been found.
Okay.
But there were 111 drill holes in that thing when I arrived, and they still hadn't hit the ore body.
Right.
And then beyond that, the thing that I ultimately got off the ground on my own was a huge ultramafic complex with a bunch of platinum in it, platinum, chrome and nickel. And that was sticking out of the ground in the middle of a huge exploration license that had been done to death by Newmont.
Yeah.
And they hadn't seen it. They had error mag over it. It was the biggest mag anomaly in the entire prospect that they had, 5,000 square kilometre exploration tenement. It was sticking out of the ground, literally on a road. I drove over it and I stopped to have a look because there was an unusual vegetation anomaly. And I took a bunch of soil samples. And because the vegetation looked crappy, but the soil looked really good, and it was really dark soil, so there was clearly a lot of iron about, and I couldn't see any quartz at all in any of the rocks, and I couldn't recognise any of the rocks because they're all weird. So I just sent them to the lab for everything, and it came back screaming platinum.
Wow.
And Newmont had been there, they'd done the error mag, there was a huge anomaly, but the anomaly was long and skinny, and they were looking for round anomalies because they were looking for porphyries, and there were numerous ones there that fit that model. But this one didn't fit that model, so they didn't look, and they never assayed for anything other than copper, lead, zinc, and arsenic. So none of the elements that were in it showed up in their assays. They'd sampled it, they'd sampled the creeks that drained it, but they just weren't looking for it.
Yeah. So I mean, you talked about Rule 20, and for those people listening, and I'll link it there, but what's the lesson here, and what's the rule that comes out of it, and can you just call it out so that we follow the rules correctly?
So Rule 20 is that there are, despite what the common belief, there are still plenty of big Tier 1 good quality ore deposits sticking out of the ground that have not been discovered and can be turned into mines. You just have to jump those hurdles that we just discussed.
Yeah, case in point by the story. Yeah. Well, look, that must be exciting as well. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than seeing those results come back. I'm sure your eyes would have lit up, and there were, do you remember where you were? I mean, what was the situation? Were you with people, or were you just staring at a laptop at the end of a long day? What was the situation, or were there other people involved with that success, or was it just you staring at a bit of data at the end of the day?
The story was I'd gone out to chase up a porphyry target that Newmont had identified, and as I said, I saw this unusual vegetation anomaly, and it didn't look right. But we weren't on the prospect that where I was looking for, so I sort of stored that in my head, and then we went to look at the prospect, and it didn't look so great. So we took a few samples, and then I said, well, we'll go back and have a look at that vegetation anomaly. And I had two crews of soil samplers with me, and I sent them out just to take samples on every ridge, or all they could get in a day. And then, still in the dark about what the geology was, I went back and sent the assays to the lab for everything, including platinoids, because of that unusual soil, and thought no more about it. And then a month later, I got an email. I was sitting in my desk in my office in Vientiane, and the other guys were there, and I looked at the assay sheet, and I almost had to call up the lab and say, I did say ppm, not ppb for platinum, because
wow, one of those
67 or something of the 80 samples that we took were more than 0.1 ppm platinum, with the highest being 1 ppm platinum.
Geez, and when that confirmation came through, I'm pretty sure that would have put a big smile on your face. But I just want to go back to those results, because I mean that sounds like some pretty spectacular results. To put a blunt question out there, there was no retirement in those results, or there was where did it not get all the way to the end?
That's a very long story for which we would have to have an entire session to discuss it. But
okay, a short version or abridged version?
The short summary version, I double checked to make sure it was real. I sort of grabbed the old Newmont report out of the cupboard and went, what the? And I flipped through the pages and had a look at it, and there was the mag anomaly, and we were right on the very southern tip of it. And the thing was like 20 kilometres long, and I went, holy smoke.
That's fantastic.
We'd better go and have a look at that.
Yeah.
And then I immediately went off to Australia to try and find a joint venture partner. I started talking to the government guys saying, I'd like to put an application here. And they said, we want a partner, to see someone with enough money and the skills and the background to do this. So I went looking for a partner in Australia. I found Dominion Mining at the time, out of Western Australia. They had an exceptional record of putting things into production. They had a pile of money in the bank. They had all the things that the Lao government wanted, supposedly. And I brought them over, and there was a whole bunch of stories there, but they got excited and they made an application, and we sat down and wrote a joint venture.
Yeah.
And the bottom line for the joint venture was they would make an application, and if it got granted, we would be in a joint venture. And the terms of the joint venture were all very clearly set out, and I hired a lawyer to go over the thing and make sure it was watertight and everything.
I know where this is going. Yeah.
Anyway, and I remember having a conversation with the exploration manager at the time, and I was niggling about some point, and he said, look, we're good friends, and, we wouldn't screw you like that. And I said, well, the trouble is that when the Tate comes, this point becomes important, I won't be talking to you. I'll be talking to some lawyer who your company has hired to screw me.
Yeah.
And alas, that came exactly to be, because at some point later, in fact, during the whole grant process, which took an awfully long time, as you might imagine in Laos, Dominion was taken over by Kingsgate, who ran the Chatri mine in Thailand and a couple other things. And they didn't like the agreement we'd joined up with. So they basically said, well, see you in court. And and of course they knew that I had, not the resources that they would to fight something in court. And they just basically stonewalled me.
Wow.
And but then I stonewalled them, and eventually they were kicked out of Thailand because they upset the local government there. And they lost interest in Laos because they were out of Thailand and they didn't really like platinum anyway. So they handballed it on to an Australian junior, That Australian junior attempted twice to float it, failed because the market was crappy.
Yeah.
They eventually backed it into a shell, got some money, raised some private cash, actually got to the stage of drilling it. And during the period when they were trying to float it, some accountant must have poured through the contracts and discovered that they still hadn't signed off on that deal. And they got back to me and said, oh, look, we'd really like to sign that off. And eventually I did get it signed off, but I just had to outweight the other guys. And,
It's never easy, eh? That sounds, I mean, you hear so many similar stories. I mean, it isn't, good business deals should be simple, I guess, and should be mutually beneficial. But almost want to stare at the camera and say, Kingsgate Guide, if you're listening, then, boo to you, because that's, it's a small industry at the end of the day. But wise lessons, I guess. But I just wanted to get onto some of the other stuff that you're doing, Nick, because, we were just joking. We can talk for hours about all the adventures in crazy countries, and we were joking. That's probably a whole podcast by itself, right? I'm sure. Between what was that, Stuart? He was saying chased by bears in Mongolia or something, and all that. I mean, I'm sure you've got your fair share of war stories as well. But then we would certainly run out of time. So I just wanted to come back on a few points that I know interest you and that I just wanted to talk to you about for some time. But how did you get from that that mapping space? What made you pick up the camera? Because obviously you already you're clearly a camera guy. Sorry, I had to smile there. You're clearly a camera guy. You understand your cameras. How did you just think, and I'll record a couple of things and see how I go? What's the idea behind it? I mean, you're obviously passionate about education and sharing your knowledge. Is that really as simple as it is, or do you have sort of a broader goal here, or do you just see where it goes and it's good for now?
There's like everything. There's a long history. I inherited a camera from my mother. My mother was a keen photographer, and an old Zeiss and SLR. So I learned how to use a camera early on, and at school, high school, myself and a couple of other guys were mucking around, and we entered some photographs, black and white. We developed our own film at school. We set up a little lab in the sports storeroom or something, and developed our own stuff. And we submitted some stuff to a competition, and I bloody well won. And there was a problem because it was a competition for school camera clubs, and there was no club. so we had to invent one very quickly to accept the prize. And but anyway, that sort of cemented my passion and my skills for photography. And then came time to do my honours project at James Cook University, and I understood already very much that a picture was worth 1,000 words, and writing stuff for me is a pain. I could do it, but it's a pain. It's a whole lot easier to take a photograph and explain what I meant with that. So my thesis at James Cook, honours thesis, ran to 2 volumes, and it's famous for taking up more shelf space than anyone else's bloody thesis. And then, of course, I couldn't believe how what an advance it was when digital cameras came along, and you could just take things and print them in PDFs without having to go to the photo shop and print them and stick them in with sticky tape. And, so that just made a giant advance for me. And every report I ever write, it's basically just an illustrated thought stream of what I've seen in the field, illustrated with photographs. So I take a photograph of every outcrop that's any significance. And nowadays that's super easy with digital cameras. Video was a whole nother world, a new complete learning curve, and I avoided it for a long time, even though cameras could actually do it. Although I started doing it because in another life, I fly model airplanes, and I used to video those, and I have a whole nother video channel on how to fly model airplanes and gliders in particular.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to do the basics there, but I already had the photography skills, so I understood about light and how cameras worked and all that kind of stuff. And but then editing video, first of all, you needed a supercomputer to do it. The software was really expensive and yada, yada, yada. But just about 3 to 5 years ago, that all changed and computers got fast. The internet got fast enough to upload video. YouTube got free. And DaVinci Resolve, the editing software that I use to edit, got free. It used to be $50,000 and now it's free. So all of a sudden, all those tools just became available, and I, couldn't ignore it anymore. And then I started doing the airplane ones, and then I started one or two just to see how it would go in geology. And the big motivation behind it was again, my father. In his 80s, he was like the oracle in the basement. Nobody even bothered going to Google when they had a chemistry question. They just go down and see my dad. And I was there with him a few times when people came in, and he would just spout knowledge like a fountain. It was just incredible, the stuff that was stacked in his head. And I realized on the day he died, that just evaporated. It was just gone. All that knowledge that he had and the connections that he put together and all that time. I mean, he published papers and things, but you'd have to dig through those to find the information. I thought, I'm not going to let that happen with the 30 years of experience that I've had in the field. So I thought, I'm just going to make videos about how you do stuff in the field, the stuff you learn after university, because that just wasn't out there. And I did a bit of research on YouTube and found there was almost nothing. And what there was really awful quality. So I thought, I can do better than that. And I'm just going to, every time I see an interesting outcrop, I'm just going to make a video, because my camera that I had was plenty good enough. And of course, I improved things as time went on, but I just started shooting those things. And then I learned how to edit, and I learned how to do YouTube and all the other stuff that goes with that. And and then COVID came along right about that time when I was just sort of learning how to edit and everything. So that sort of pushed me into the office for a while, and I learned much more about how to do it properly and what works on YouTube and what doesn't, and all that kind of stuff. So
I've seen you go through that little journey, because I saw your earlier ones as well, and I remember having this sort of feeling like, somebody needed to do this. It was immediately obvious that like you said, you do the research and nobody else does it. There's the other channel called Out There Learning, which is pretty good. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. That's in that sort of space, but not really from an exploration perspective. So it was really perfect timing, and that's clear, because you're clearly getting that traction and that feedback. Sorry, my earpiece just fell out of my ear as you had something coming through the door there. So it's all happening today. Professionals at work here, right? But it's good. It's great that you're obviously hitting the mark there, right? I mean, the comments and so many people, on the subject, RC drilling or mapping or basic geology, and then why it's important. I love it. Bite-sized pieces. So really fantastic work and a real service to the industry. And like you said, freely available on YouTube, right? It's you can find anything you want there, and it's been very, very good resource. Great viewership that we can all be jealous of. But are you trying to build a broader reach? I mean, what's the end goal? Is it just fun to put videos out and nobody cares? I mean, clearly you're not interested in monetizing videos, and neither are we, right? But so we don't have to worry about any of that nonsense. But is there a bigger goal, or do you like to Does this overlap with what we were talking about before, this education space and trying to get some excitement into young people that this could be a cool thing to do? Is that a little bit part of it as well?
Yeah, well, COVID gave me the time to find out how YouTube worked. Like, so I sort of had the technical stuff down by then, but understanding how the algorithm worked, how you get lots of views, how you get lots of followers, and all that kind of stuff. And there's some really good channels out there of people who research that really well and describe it. And I quickly learned that there just aren't enough geologists in the world to make that an important thing.
Yeah.
So it never was. That's not the reason I went into it.
Yeah.
And but it did allow me to get the algorithm starting to work on my side, so that I would just reach a wider audience of geologists and people interested in earth science of any description. So, and the thing you learn is that it's a snowball, and that what happened early on in the thing. I was a nobody and I had no followers, and it's extremely hard to get your head above water. So, because YouTube feeds your videos out to more people if it sees that you're getting lots of views. But of course, how do you get those lots of views? Well, but it is a snowball, and once you find something that works and start doing some more of that, it works more for you, and then it snowballs. So. So that just got it out there and started reaching a wider number of people. And it's just amazing the number of people. I sort of quickly saturated the Australian market and nearly quickly the US market. But now there's an enormous number of new followers coming from Africa and the Middle East and South America. Just extraordinary numbers of keen young geologists who really want to learn stuff. And, they just find all of a sudden they can get it on YouTube,
Well, exactly right. I mean, imagine, I don't know how much work you've done in Africa, but you've been all over the continent, and you connect with all these people who really want to learn, right? But they don't really have access to much. But now they have access to internet, but then you still need to somehow find information, right? And it's so much easier if there is a channel that you can just tune into and listen, and maybe a few links get provided there with some extra information, and I can imagine that would create specifically for the topics that you cover, it'd be a huge audience and great feedback. So that's that's good to hear. So obviously still growing, and maybe offline you should share some of the tips, because obviously I probably talk about less exciting stuff with which not decked out in a geologist kit, but sitting in a studio and not out in the field, which is probably a little bit less exciting to watch. But by the way, I remember, didn't you do a little video on the orb spiders? I really enjoyed that, because I did exactly that in North Queensland, and I had my little rule about how far away trees would be that allowed me to walk through them without having to worry about those damn spiders, because I don't quite like spiders. Snakes all fine, but and at one point, you make the mistake of judging those trees. No, that's too far apart. And I was mapping with my Trimble and my hammer, and I walked through it, and you feel the resistance, and you go, fuck, and I threw everything up in the air, and then flapping and seeing that. And I remember it. And when I saw that video, that connection and the way you put that together, definitely, that got you a subscribe and a like, I guess, or however the kids call it these days, right? So no, really great content. I love that bit of a fun. It doesn't all have to be serious and dry science. Geology isn't dry science, but great videos and great angle.
Yeah, well, that reflects heavily on the things that work, and the things that work are things that people can identify with, things that they meet in their daily life and work. So they're the things I try to focus on, and the things I found that work by far the best are things that give geologists and earth scientists of all kinds some tool that they can use in the field to help them get their job done. Just simple stuff. I mean, the spiders one was just something that occurred to me because I've done that a dozen times. Every other geologist I know who's worked in Australia has. So I thought, that's going to be something that everyone will identify with.
You're not wrong.
And of course it did. So, those things work. But, by far the most successful one, I think, to date has been the diamond drilling one, where I just showed the process, and close behind that is the one for core logging, the basics of core logging. This is how you do it, And that's not part of the university syllabus of this is how an RC rig works, this is how a diamond rig works. And yet you go out into the field and your first job is to sit on an RC rig.
So the successful videos, core logging, that's the thing that people are hungry for. Show me how to do it, and that's clearly hitting the note. So, I can see how those are the most popular. What are the next ones on the list? Have you got how do you work? Have you got a whole list, or do you literally, as you were describing it, just, hey, that's a nice outcrop, get my camera out? Because you need to be a wee bit disciplined, because YouTube channels will tell you need to structure these videos and all the rest of it. Do you have a list, or do you just run and see?
I do have a list of bigger projects that I'm working on. And I just wait for the appropriate outcrop to come along to fill in all the gaps of those things. And when I get enough parts, then I'll put one of those bigger ones together. But I do those outcrop of the day ones where I just see an outcrop that has a story to tell, and I punch them out in a day. They're really quite, whatever comes along. And in fact, after much sort of zigzagging on learning how the algorithm works and everything else, the one thing that the problem for most YouTubers in inverted commas is that if you find something that's unique and becomes really popular, people instantly copy it, because the competition for views is ferocious. And the people that copy you will have more time, more money, better cameras. That's how to get lots of views, and there's no way you can stop that. To get something that's unique and difficult to copy is actually really hard and impossible to think up one just randomly, because anyone can copy anything now. It's easy.
Yeah, but you can't copy what you're doing unless you actually have the deep knowledge that you have to actually talk to the subject, right? I mean, that's the key here. I mean, going to an outcrop and saying this is a cool outcrop, anybody can do that. But I dare you to say something useful about it, right? I mean, that's not for everybody. As a matter of fact, that's almost for nobody. And if you then match that Venn diagram circle with the ability to handle a camera and to immerse yourself into some YouTube mechanisms, I'd find it pretty surprising if you find people who can do that copycatting. Although I know exactly what you're talking about, but we're not particular Mr. Beast or Joe Rogan here, right? We don't have to just come up with a bullshit topic and switch on a microphone and talk about it. Well, maybe that's what I'm doing. But I'll soon hear from people, I guess. But it does require one to have some knowledge about the topics that you're talking about. I guess it's not the skill of having a conversation, because that's not that difficult, I guess. Although if I'm putting a critical eye on myself, it's actually more difficult than you think to have a conversation and to think on the spot. But so the copying, I would say in this industry particularly, you would find a pretty dedicated, following that would be pretty loyal to people putting that to you putting that material out. And I think from what I understood, it's just the anxiety that comes with having to produce videos all the time. You see a lot of, as you said, inverted commas, YouTubers go under. I mean, I'm a massive chess fan. I've played chess all my life, and chess has absolutely exploded with COVID and that twitching and the streaming and all the rest of it. I love it. And all these, there's a number of people that have 3 million followers, but you can tell these people just just, dying inside because of the pressure of having to put a freaking video out every day that is engaging and that you shout at the screen and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, geez, that's not for me. And that's also not what I want to do. I want to have interesting conversations with interesting people. And if I miss a week, then fuck it. I don't care, and hope nobody else cares either. So,
yeah, well, that's what I discovered, is that by some incredible stroke of luck, I've lucked onto a model that is extremely hard to copy.
Yeah.
Because if you actually decided that you wanted to go out and film interesting outcrops, you'd have to do a bunch of research to find out where the outcrops were. You'd have to go and, drive out to the outcrop, figure out when there was a good time to be there, and, do all the research and pay for the hotel and the food and everything else. You need a BBC level budget to do that.
Yeah.
You simply can't do that sitting in a YouTube studio.
No.
So it's very difficult to copy.
Yeah.
So I'm just super lucky with that, with the stuff I do on YouTube.
So do you always, sorry to interrupt, but do you always, I was going to ask you exactly that question, do you always just combine it with a job, and if you see an outcrop, you just quickly flick the camera on and it will come out in a wash with the bill that you send the client at the end of the day? Because sometimes you probably have to be, combining a tea break. I mean, nobody out there in the field clocks 5-minute brackets, obviously, but, you're not out there to make videos, you're out there to come up with a product for a client, and if they fly you to South Korea to look at some interesting rocks, then you probably I always feel under pressure to use every time that I have to come up with the most solutions that I can in the short time that I'm there, and I'd feel awkward switching on the camera for 20 minutes to quickly video an outcrop. Do you always combine that? Because you're not booking hotels and airplanes just to go and video an outcrop, because you need that big budget for that. How do you do that?
So, first of all, you just don't come across that many, standout outcrops that are worth a video. I might see one a week or two a week or something like that. And as you say, you don't clock 5-minute intervals. People take, 20 minutes off to have lunch or whatever. That's
no, doesn't work.
So typically on one of those outcrop of the day things, it'll take me 20 minutes to half an hour to shoot the footage required to do a 3 to 5 minute video. And of course, while I'm doing that, I'm thinking about the outcrop in more detail, and of course it's something interesting geologically. So it's sort of more in-depth research on that particular outcrop in the first case. Secondly, there's often people with me that are young geologists, and part of my job now is training young geologists in the field. So they see the process, they see how I think about the outcrop and everything, and so there's some learning in it for them. And then, of course, I produce a video at the end that is about their project and their things that they're working on. There is some small amount of issue there with now, people publishing stuff about projects outside ASX announcements can get them into trouble. I was going to
ask you about that. Yeah.
Some clients are nervous one way. Some clients are nervous the other way. They want me to. Some clients want me to mention that it's them. I generally try to avoid mentioning where I am or certainly the people that I'm working for, because I don't want to give them that kind of aggro. It hasn't been a problem for me. So I talk very closely with the client about, do you want me to mention that I'm on your project or not? And then from my side also, there's another issue of you have to be super careful. If you're in the instructional type video market, like I am, you can seriously damage your brand by putting out something that's clearly advertorial. People instantly recognize now something that's promo, and they'll instantly devalue the information because they see it as cash for comment. And then that will ricochet onto all your other videos. They'll start thinking, I wonder if he was being paid to do that one. No.
Yeah.
so you have to be super, super careful, and I'm very, very careful not to put anything on my channel that is an obvious promotion. I'm super cautious to explain to my clients what I'm doing, and if they want me to preview the video with them before it goes live, I'll do that. I really don't want to hurt my clients, obviously, because I want the opportunity to go and look at the interesting outcrops that they have. So I'm careful about that, but for multiple reasons, for their welfare as much as mine.
Look, I think as I'm listening to that, I mean, there is obviously gradations to it, right? I mean, if it's just an interesting outcrop, then that's obviously very unlikely to be risky. I mean, just thinking out loud. But if you run into something that, visible mineralization, that nobody else has found, and you talk about that, and, people are, it's obvious through whatever background or otherwise that where you are or who you're with, that's definitely something that could be fairly market sensitive, right? I mean, that sort of discovery type visible mineralization stuff. I mean, just this week there was a retraction, another group that put visible mineralization results out without applying these AIG rules of some sort about talking about the right percentage of estimated sulfides in this sample. It's pretty strict, so I can understand. And I talk about that compliance a lot on this channel, as you might know, and it's a bit dry, but there's a fear in the market that you can't say anything anymore. So I kind of understand where that's coming from. And I've watched a number of your videos, and I never had that. In a couple of instances where I thought, you probably want to be careful with that, but never where I thought, geez, that's I'd be flagging that if I would be a company. So, but I understand, you have to be on your toes, and probably from the other side, from the people watching, they're very sensitive to promotional stuff, and it's got to be educational, and you're going to stay true to your, to your calling, and not try to sell anything that people don't want, I guess. But tricky.
Well, that's two things there. One, as I said, if it even looks like you're trying to sell something, you'll damage your own brand, along with the potential for issues with the ASX rules. But also something else that has become apparent to me is that you have an audience who's come to your channel for a very specific purpose, and one of the things that, first of all, it can damage your overall viewership if you post something that's outside your normal realm, because people go, "What? He's lost the plot. He's not doing geology anymore," or so then they won't come back for the next one. And in the tsunami of stuff that comes in over YouTube, you can't be doing that.
No, the attention span. I mean, people are obviously. I mean, and as I'm wading into this, is still, after half a year and not all that many videos, because obviously quite a lot longer, and it would attract a completely different audience. They're completely different conversations. I mean, I talk about sampling, resource estimation, but also about the education, and now we're talking. I mean, they're quite different subjects, and I'm guessing that half of it wouldn't appeal to most people. But are you trying to please your viewers, or to a degree? They're just conversations that I find interesting, and if sometimes only 100 people find them interesting, sometimes 900, quote unquote, not my problem. Some people will find it if they find it interesting, and I can see the pressure of building a bigger brand around that, and where viewers are really quite important, particularly for people who monetize the channel in one degree or another. But that's a completely different world again. It's interesting, but look, again, what you're putting out there, I think it's great. For those who are not familiar with the channel, I'll obviously put a link in, and go and check that out. Anything on your mind that, sorry to dance around in various subjects, we had an idea to talk about this exploration rule, but I actually quite enjoyed talking about your background and the channel and how you do things. I actually quite find that quite interesting. Anything else that's on your mind? What's keeping you up at night at the moment? I mean, industry-wise, or you're just very happy doing your thing and not taking too much notice what's going on out there? What's on your mind?
I'm just juggling time. It's really, I'm busier than I've ever been as a result of doing this.
Right. That's cool.
I'll just really, for those obsessed with money, I'll just give a bit of background on that. I have monetized the channel. Initially, I didn't because I didn't want to pester my viewers with ads.
Yeah.
But then YouTube changed the rules and they said, we're going to run ads whether you monetize it or not. And so I thought, well, I might as well. And you also get some degree of control over the kind of ads that get run.
Right.
But the bottom line is, as I said, there just aren't enough geologists in the world to make an income level of money out of that. It literally buys me a coffee a day if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And I have the paid versions, which are the sort of longer version thing. And initially that didn't make much money at all. But as the library of content grew, that's now become a better value proposition. And that's now paid for basically my cameras.
Yeah. Oh, well. That's,
so not enough to eat, but keeps me functioning. With good quality gear, so that's I'm happy with that. But by an extraordinary margin, the real return has been in the promotion. It's just I'm literally fighting off work, so I can't keep up with all that I have to do. So if anyone considering even doing anything like this is. Forget the money if you're doing instructional videos. No. The value is in, for me personally, it's just giving back the enormous volume of stuff that I've learned. And so there's that sort of feel-good side of it.
Yeah.
And the other side is it just generates a ton of work.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, you're obviously putting yourself out there, and it's clear that you know how this stuff works just by watching it. I mean, what better business card do you need than you can write a CV and write, I'm really good at mapping rocks, but people go, yeah, whatever, dude. I mean, but you can see you're talking about it, and they're like, yeah, what he says, and then there are plenty of people. That are exploration managers, MDs who watch this stuff as well, and they say, well, I want to get that guy to come and map this thing because he clearly knows what he's talking about. So that's not a terrible side effect, I'm sure, that you can choose the cool things to go to and the cool jobs to go and map. And I had some more questions there, but maybe that's for a future episode because again, I was joking with a couple of people, I think Stuart Masters and Brett Davies, about some of these war stories, and I think we need to have a special episode on that at some point. Sounds like you can chip in on that one a fair bit. So, countries you've been to and experiences. But now, look, I really appreciate talking to you and lifting the lid on some of the things that you do. I think that's quite different to what we talk about normally, and making me quite jealous because that's a great combination of creating content and still being out there doing the fun stuff. So love the channel, keep doing what you're doing, and it's maybe we'll at some point might have the luxury of tagging along in the field, do a video together. I don't know what I would talk about, maybe spiders, but no, I really appreciate it. So thanks for coming on the show, and hope to see you again in the future sometime.
Well, thanks. It's always good to chat to someone who's lived a bit of your life and had a few of the same hassles and experiences. So absolutely. Not only has this generated more work for me, but it's now starting to generate work of people wanting to get stuff down on video, educational type stuff, and perhaps that's a future retirement stream of work for me, is to do educational video production, particularly in earth science, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, the other side as well, the public education side. I'm doing some more of that. I'm working on a couple of courses with Richard Lilly now, video
Yeah.
coursework. Another one
Nice.
with Greg Morrison.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
they'll be
cool.
coming up in this new year.
Yeah, a few collabs. Well, that's that. I was thinking that might be on the cards because that's a logical place to go. And yeah, there's a few people doing interesting things, and they don't always have to be the same. So now I'll watch that space. So yeah. Now, thanks again, Nick. Great to chat to you. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, all the best with the channel.
All right, same. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, man. See ya.